Hi. So I was saying to my friends the other day, I've never really read Christian scripture, so I can't make a good judgment. And because I've never read anything Christian, well, you know, ancient Christian, I thought that I'd read this. Yep, that's right. The Holy Bible. I'm going to read the Holy Bible from cover to cover, Old Testament to New Testament, and I'm going to talk about each book on camera. So for instance, when I finish Genesis, which won't be too long away, I'll come on here and I'll talk about it. I'll release a new video every Sunday. I think it will take me about a week to read each book because it doesn't look very thick, but the pages are stupidly thin. Like, yeah, you get the picture. There's 1,300 pages in this. It's quite a lot of pages, but it looks really thin, but it's not. Well, the pages are thin, so yeah. So next time you see me, I will have read Genesis. Au revoir. Okay, so last night I finished reading Genesis, and I thought that my mind would be prepared for the inevitable horrific things that would await me inside that book. But I was wrong. I was literally wrong. I thought that the book was going to be a lot less horrific than it was. It was terrible. In fact, I need to wear something different just to symbolise how ridiculously horrific this book really was. Okay, so everyone knows how this book starts. I hope you do, because everyone really does know how the book starts. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Which is completely incorrect. I'm 100% sure that that is not correct. The earth was created through a series of collisions and shit, but it definitely wasn't just done. No, it's not how the earth was created. It's just ridiculous. No. Then goes on to say, God said, let there be light, and let there be darkness. So he created darkness even though... Well, basically, he separated light from the darkness, even though darkness is not really an entity at all. You see, darkness is just the absence of light. That's it. Light is an entity, but darkness isn't. Just like cold isn't, but heat is. But it's alright, we can let it slide. Doesn't matter that much because, you know, the other stuff that happens in this book is way out of order. Doesn't really equate to this. So then, you know, he commands everything else. Oh, let there be water, let there be everything else. He basically just makes everything, you know, radiators, jam, post-it notes, lights. No, he didn't make any of that, but, you know, he creates everything. In 7 days as well. And then he creates man. Now this is the very interesting part. He creates man out of soil, you know, literal dirt. So, you know, he gets some dirt from the ground and he forms man out of the dirt. Then he plants a garden in the east, in Eden, even though... Actually no, it doesn't matter. I was going to say no countries had really been named or created, but, you know, whatever, we'll just let it slide. And then, while Adam was asleep, because Adam had no companion, he took a rib from Adam's rib cage and he made a woman. Somehow. And because morality wasn't given to humans, they didn't know that they were naked. And some kind of, you know, wicked snake came along. Now this snake, who can talk, by the way, told Eve to eat a fruit from a forbidden tree called the Tree of Knowledge. And Eve did because, you know, the snake was all bad boy, you know, wearing leather jackets and sunglasses. Yeah, Adam was just the nice guy who was just trying to be nice. So then, for some reason, Adam eats some fruit as well, and God is really pissed, and they realise that they're naked. So then God punishes the snake by getting rid of its legs. It has to crawl on its belly for the rest of eternity. Poor snake. Even though, by studying snakes nowadays, we can learn that they're adapted to be like that, but whatever. We'll let it slide, doesn't matter. So now that God has realised that man and woman are just like him, and they have the knowledge of good and evil, he banishes them, he gets rid of them, and he makes it so that they can't grow stuff without working really hard. And he says to Adam, you'll become just like the soil that you are, because you're soil. So then Adam and Eve have 2 children, Cain and Abel, and they grow up, and God loves Abel, but he thinks that Cain is a complete twat. Because Cain only sacrifices fruit to the Lord, but Abel sacrifices animals like goats and sheep and things like that. So Cain gets jealous and he kills Abel. Yeah, simple as that. Just said, oh Abel, do you want to go out to a field sometime? Yeah, and he kills him with a rock. And God says, oh Cain, naughty boy, you shouldn't have killed Abel, that's really bad. So he makes it so that he can't grow anything in the soil. And Cain says to God, well, I'll have to move away and someone will kill me. And at this point I was thinking, who's going to kill you? It's you, Adam and Eve. They're the only people on the planet. Who's going to kill you? But anyway, God says to him, well, I'll put a mark on you that says if anyone kills you, 7 people will have to be killed. So then the book gets a bit boring, sort of talks about all the descendants of Cain and Adam and Eve. You know, literally everyone's living to like 950 for some reason. I mean, that's just ridiculous. You know, it says right here, Adam lived for another 800 years. He had other children that died at the age of 930. So Adam died at the age of 930. But then it keeps on going down, the descendants, until it reaches Noah, who is 500 years old. And he has 3 sons, Shem, Ham and Japheth. And then, if you thought that it didn't get any weirder than that, God thought, well, I don't really like mankind anymore, it kind of sucks. So God decided, let's start over, because there's only one nice person in the world, that's Noah. I only really like Noah, I think he's a decent guy, but everyone else, every single other person is a bad person. So the Lord says to Noah, oh Noah, I'm going to make it rain for 40 days and 40 nights, and you're going to have to build an ark to save yourself, because everything's going to die, apart from obviously the fish and the ducks and the birds. They're not going to die because they won't be killed by a flood. But anyway, Noah still has birds on his ark. Oh yeah, forgot to mention, yeah, God just wants Noah to get every single species of living mammal and reptile and every single animal onto his boat that exists. 14 of each. Actually, it sort of fluctuates. First it says 1 pair of each kind of animal, and then like the next verse it says 7 pairs of each kind of animal. I don't really know which is right, but we'll go with 14 of each animal because 7 pairs is 14. That's potentially tens of thousands of animals on a 333 meters long boat. No, that's not physically possible. You can't, no, that can't happen, no. But anyway, like I've said before, we'll let it slide. Maybe their meters were different in those. Actually no, this is like an abridged version in today's English. 333 meters. They didn't use meters back then, so I think my friend was telling me that they measured it in rabbit's feet or rabbit's hands or something, I don't know. So then it floods, rains for 40 days and 40 nights, and it says here that the water rose above the highest mountain. So what, the clouds in the sky are going to be below the water level. So then the flood ended, like, in a very long time. It took a very long time for the flood to end, but it did end. And then Noah offers a sacrifice. He sacrifices each kind of animal. Each kind. So that's thousands of animals that he's just sacrificed. And it says right here, the odour of the sacrifice pleased the Lord, and he said to himself, never again will I put the earth under a curse because of what man does. Why does that make him think that? I mean, he just killed millions of people, and I was thinking, maybe, actually I shouldn't have done that, because the odour pleases me. So then God makes a covenant with Noah, blah blah blah. and Noah has some sons. Oh wait, he already had some sons, but it sort of explains his sons, but you don't really need to know about that. Then it tells you about the descendants of him. It's just like a massive list of descendants. No, you don't really need to know about it. This is the interesting part. It says that people moved into the east and they came across a plain, and they all banded together and said, let's make some bricks and let's make a city. We'll name it Babylon, and I'll put a big tower in the centre. And God saw it and he thought, this isn't good, I don't like this. So he got all the people, he spread them across the world and made them speak different languages so that they couldn't ever do that again. What was the point in that? Why don't you just let them build a little city? Actually, that does remind me. I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but earlier on in the book, going back to Cain, where is it? Yeah, here. Cain built a city for himself, by himself. What is this? Minecraft? It's obviously not Minecraft. People in Minecraft build cities by themselves, for themselves. Surely a house would have done. I mean, he's the only person on the planet, near enough, apart from his parents, and he builds a city for himself. By himself. Anyway, going back to Noah and his little guys. One of his descendants is called Shem, and Shem has loads of children, they have loads of children, they have loads of children, it keeps on going down, and it ends with a guy called Abram. Now the next few pages are all about Abram. So God says to Abram, I'm going to make a covenant with you. And by making a covenant with Abram has to swear to circumcise every male among him. No, you didn't hear me incorrectly. He wants Abram to literally chop off part of the penis of every male around him, including himself. It says right here, any male who has not been circumcised will no longer be considered one of my people. So basically, any man with a complete penis is no friend of mine. So God renames Abram Abraham, which is, well, everyone will recognise Abraham. It's just Abram, but not many people have actually heard of. And he says to him, your wife, Sahari, if I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, he said no, she's not called Sahari anymore. Call her Sarah instead, because I like Sarah. So the Lord visits Sarah and Abraham, and he says, you guys are going to have a son one day. In 9 months' time you're going to have a son. And Sarah chuckles a little bit, because she's quite old, and she says, oh, can I still enjoy sex? That's literally what it says. She says, I can't have any more children. She laughs, and God says, why does your wife just laugh? And she was like, oh no, I didn't laugh. And God was like, yes, you did. And that's the ending of that little passage. It's a bit awkward, isn't it? So then, skipping forward in time, there's this place called Sodom and Gomorrah, if you really insist on adding Gomorrah onto the end of that. And 2 angels went to Sodom, and they met this guy called Lot at the city gate. And as he saw them, he went up to them, bowed, and his face touched the ground. And he was like, oh, angels, blah, blah, blah. They said to him, we're going to spend the night in the city square because we're hardcore like that. But Lot kept on insisting, no, spend the night in my house because I'm a nice guy. So the angels go to Lot's house and they spend the night with him. But something really, really weird happens in the morning. You see, the entire townspeople of Sodom decide to surround Lot's house because they know that the angels are in there. And they shout into Lot's house, let the angels out, we want to have sex with them. No kidding, the town's men were there as well. And these angels were male angels, they're men angels. So these men, they're calling out and they want to rape the angels, and Lot is like, no, that's immoral, you can't just do that. And the town people are just like, get out of the way, you stupid man. And the angels pull Lot back into the house and say, Sodom is a wicked place, we're going to destroy it. So God says to Abraham, yeah, I'm going to destroy Sodom because that's how I am. And Abraham says, but you can't kill anyone who's innocent. And I'm just going to read out exactly what he says. He says, are you really going to destroy the innocent with the guilty? If there are 50 innocent people in the city, Will you destroy the whole city? Won't you spare it in order to save the 50? Surely you won't kill the innocent with the guilty. That's impossible, you can't do that. If you did, the innocent would be punished along with the guilty. He keeps on, like, repeating himself, whatever. That's impossible. The judge of all earth has to act justly. The Lord answered, if I find 50 innocent people in Sodom, I will spare the whole city for their sake. Abraham spoke again. Please forgive my boldness in continuing to speak to you, Lord. I am only a man and have no right to say anything. But perhaps there are only 45 innocent people instead of 50. Will you destroy the whole city because there are only 5 too few? The Lord answered, I will not destroy the city if I find 45 innocent people. Abraham spoke again. Perhaps there will only be 40. He replies, I will not destroy it if there are only 40. Abraham said, please don't be angry, Lord, but I must speak again. What if there are only 30? He said, I will not do it if I find 30. Abraham said, please forgive my boldness in continuing to speak to you, Lord. Suppose there are only 20. He said, I will not destroy the city if I find 20. Abraham said, please don't be angry, Lord, and I'll speak just once more. What if only 10 are found? He said, I will not destroy it if there are only 10. After he had finished speaking with Abraham, the Lord went away, and Abraham returned home. So basically, if the Lord finds anyone who's innocent in Sodom, he won't destroy it. But they both know too well that there's no innocent people in Sodom, which is ridiculous. I mean, a city of at least 1,000 and there's not even 10 innocent people. Just because they all want to rape angels doesn't mean that there's just one innocent dude just sitting in the bakery like, oh, I'm a nice guy. Maybe like Noah. Just not Noah literally, because Noah's dead. Sorry guys, but I forgot to mention it, but Noah died earlier on. So back to the angels getting molested. Lot escapes Sodom and Gomorrah and he runs to the hills because the Lord rains down some kind of acid thing on the valley and he kills everyone. He destroys Sodom and Gomorrah. Everyone's burning alive. People are being turned into pillars of salt. And Abraham watches on the cliff like, oh, it's just too bad. And then Abraham has a son called Isaac. And I'm not really going to expand on that because it doesn't really say anything about that. But then a bit later in life, after this whole Sodom and Gomorrah massacre has been forgotten, God says to Abraham, kill Isaac for me please. And Abraham, without even thinking twice, says, yeah, alright. Now bear in mind, Isaac is the most precious thing to Abraham. He's his only son. He's his entire life. But Abraham just says, okay, for you Lord, I'll do anything. So he takes Isaac and he takes him to a mountain and he straps him to a fucking altar and he gets this knife and he's about to kill him and an angel of the Lord comes down and says, wait, I changed my mind. Well, he didn't really change his mind, but it was a test for Abraham. He was testing him and the Lord said, well done Abraham, you will obey me no matter what I tell you to do. Even if I tell you to cut off your own dick, or part of it, you'll still do it. So then Sarah dies and Abraham buries her on the road to Bethlehem. Oh. Then Isaac gets a wife. Yeah. Abraham dies at the age of 175. And Isaac has 2 sons. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing the first one right. It's spelled E-S-A-U, but I'm going to pronounce it as Asu. But if I'm pronouncing it wrong, then just say so in the comments. He also has a son named Jacob, who's a complete prick. So then, as they're growing up, Asu sells his rights as firstborn son to Jacob, because Jacob somehow buys them, but whatever. Isaac lives in some place called Gerar, and this is quite peculiar actually, because Isaac moves to this place, Gerar, and when Isaac lived in Gerar, him and his wife feared that the townspeople would kill Isaac because his wife was so beautiful. So he told people that she was his sister, and the king was like, oh, I want to have sex with her, so bring her to me. And he had sex with her, and Isaac's wife was like, yeah, I'm his sister. But then, that night, in the king's dream, the Lord came down and said, I'm going to kill you. And the king was like, why? I haven't done anything wrong. And the Lord was like, well, you slept with the wife of a prophet, you're a twat. And the king was like, well, I thought that it was his sister. And the Lord said, whatever, I'm going to put a curse on you. And the king was really angry with Isaac and said, why did you lie and say that she was your sister? And Isaac said, well, I thought you'd kill me if you thought that she was my wife. And the king was like, get out of Gerar, I hate you. So Isaac leaves Gerar, and that's that. And then something very funny happens. You see, Isaac is on his deathbed, he's about to die, and he says to his son, Esau, he says, go out into the fields and kill the animal that I love so much. He doesn't really mention what animal it is. Well, I don't know whether it does on the King James version, but this is like an abridged version. He says, go out and kill an animal and bring it back to me and cook it, and that'll be my last meal ever. So then he leaves. But then Jacob either overhears it or something, and he goes and kills an animal and brings it back. And because Isaac is so old and nearly dying, he can't see, he's blind, and Jacob comes back and he says, oh father, it's me, Esau, where it's actually Jacob, and he says, look, I've got some meat for you. And the father is like, is it really you, Esau? And Jacob says, yes it is. And Isaac says, okay, I'm going to bless you now. So he blesses Jacob, thinking that it's Esau. And he blesses him, saying, oh, your descendants will be massive, and you won't be able to count them because there'll be so many of them. And then Esau comes back and says, father, I've got some meat for you. And he says, oh, Jacob, I asked Esau to do it. And he says, I am Esau. And he says, oh no, who was that then? And Esau gets really mad. He's like, oh, it must have been Jacob. And he says, no wonder his name is Jacob. I'm reading this like, what, is Jacob an insult? And I looked it up, and Jacob is it's like the Hebrew name for cheat. So yeah, so that's why Jacob is a complete prick. And then Esau is basically begging his dad, like, can't you bless me as well? And his dad's like, no, I can't, sorry. And then he dies. And Esau's like, I'm gonna kill my brother. I hate him so much. So Jacob flees. He flees this place. And then Esau has a wife. Whatever, don't really know why I said that, but it's sort of in there. Jacob does a whole lot of shit, it's not really worth mentioning. But then Jacob comes back, and he works for this guy, his name is Laban. And he says, you can't just work for me just because I'm your relative, I want to pay you for something. And Jacob was in love with one of Laban's daughters, her name was Rebecca. And he says, if I work for you for 7 years, will you let me marry your daughter Rebecca? And he says, yeah, alright. So he works for him for 7 years, and he says, okay, time is up, I want your daughter Rebecca. So he said, yeah, okay. And that night, Laban sends one of his daughters to Jacob, but he sends the wrong one. He sends Leah, I think it is, yes, instead of Rebecca. And somehow Jacob has intercourse with Leah. I mean, it was either dark or Jacob is a complete retard, but he had sex with the wrong woman. And in the morning he was furious, and he said to Laban, why? And Laban was like, well, it's tradition for me to marry off the eldest. And Jacob was like, no, I want Rebecca. So he's like, okay, work for me another 7 years and you'll get Rebecca. And he's like, yeah, okay. So he works 14 years and he eventually gets Rebecca. So then they had a nice time and they have sex and whatever. But here is the twist. The Lord has blessed Leah with children. So only Leah can have children and Rebecca cannot. So Leah gets pregnant. Twice. She gets pregnant twice. And Rachel doesn't. Yeah, I meant to say Rachel, not Rebecca. Her name's Rachel. Sorry about that. Just disregard everything. We'll let it slide. We'll let it slide. Her name's Rachel, the person that can't have children. Jacob became angry with Rachel and said, I can't take the place of the Lord. If he is the one who keeps you from having children, I can't make you have children. And she's like, oh, here's a slave girl, have sex with her. So Jacob has sex with a slave girl, and she becomes pregnant. And then he has sex with another slave girl. And then a whole lot of shit happens. Jacob runs away, But then, oh my gosh, Jacob is preparing to meet with his long-lost brother, Esau, who is very angry with Jacob. So he sends some goats and sheep ahead of him as like a little gift to his brother to say, sorry. But a scout comes back and says, your brother's got 400 men and he's going to skin you alive. And Jacob is like, oh no. And so then Jacob is alone now because he's sent all these servants ahead of him to give Esau loads of gifts. But then suddenly, some dude just starts wrestling him in Peniel. And Jacob's like punching him in the face, and this guy injures him in the rib. And long story short, this guy is supposed to represent God. So then God renames Jacob Israel, which is like the Hebrew name for struggle. But for some reason, even after this point in the book, he's still named Jacob, so whatever. So then Jacob meets Esau, whatever, and he's cool with him. He says, oh, it's fine, I forgive you. And they hug and they cry and they kiss, and you know, not in a gay way, but... And now here, this is like one of my favourite parts of Genesis. This is the part where it gets really, really weird. Okay, one of Jacob's daughters, Dinah, goes to Canaanite with 2 A's. She gets raped. You know, this guy sees her and rapes her. I think it's actually the king who rapes her. Yeah, he rapes her and then he falls in love with her. So he says to Jacob, can I marry your daughter? I know I raped her, but you know, I love her, I think she's lovely. And Jacob's horrified, like, oh, you prick. But he's a troll, you know, because of earlier in the book we already established that he's a troll. He thought, haha, I'm going to troll this guy. So, long story short, to make amends, they sort of intertwine with each other. Like Jacob and his people say, we're going to live with you guys, but first you've got to become circumcised. And these guys are like, what? Why? And he says, well, you know, God said so. So Jacob and his dudes go in there and they cut off the dicks of everyone. Or they cut off the foreskin of everyone. Like, you know, all as a big like town, they all cut off the men's foreskins. And this is part of the whole troll thing, because 3 days later, everyone's sore from their penis being mutilated, and Jacob's sons go into the town and they kill everyone. Literally everyone, like every single male in the town, they kill everyone. Children read this book. They killed everyone, and Jacob was like, oh, kids, that's bad. You shouldn't do that. This is awful. It gets worse. I'm not kidding, it gets fucking worse. So then God blesses Jacob. He blesses him. For no reason. Well, I did read it, but I've forgotten it, whatever. And Rachel dies. Boo-hoo. I thought Isaac had already died. No, whatever. Isaac died then, whatever. And then there's another long descendant list of Esau. And Jacob has a son called Joseph. Now, this is like the main part of Genesis, this guy called Joseph. Now Joseph thinks he's special, you know, he thinks he's like, you know, top dog, chosen one. He starts having dreams and he's like, oh, brothers, I had a dream last night. And his brothers are like, oh, shut up, Joseph, you twat. And Joseph is like, no, seriously, I had a dream that you guys were all bowing down to me and that I was king. And then he told his dad, and he was like, Dad, I had a dream last night. And his dad just smacks him around the head and says, little ungrateful little shit, you're never going to be king, you're just nothing. So Joseph keeps on having these dreams, and you know, and his brothers keep on getting jealous. So his brothers decide to kill him. They decide to kill their brother because they're jealous, because he's having dreams, or they're just angry or just pissed off or something. So they say, okay, let's kill Joseph, you know, while our father is not looking. Let's go out into the desert and we'll kill him. But one of the sons is saying, well, let's not kill him, you know, let's just put him in a well and just let fate decide what's in store for him. So they do that. They put him in a dry well, and just before they're about to leave him there, some dudes come along with donkeys, you know, with spice and things, and they're like, haha, something better than death. Let's sell our brother to these guys as a slave. So they sell their brother to these guys as a slave for 50 gold pieces. No, 50 silver pieces. Not as good as gold, but still. They sell their own brother to slaves. This is a book that is read to small children. They sell their brother as slaves, and Joseph, he's taken as a slave to Egypt. And his master is somehow like possessed by the Lord, because the Lord has seen what's happened, and he's like, oh, don't worry, Joseph, I'll bless you. So he blesses Joseph, and the master of Joseph kind of takes pity on him, and he gives him a lot of authority. And while the master is out, Joseph's master's wife keeps on saying, let's have sex, come on Joseph, I think you're really hot, let's have sex. And Joseph says no, it's immoral. And so the master's wife keeps on saying, every time the master is out, she keeps on saying, come on, let's have sex. And Joseph is like, no, let's not have sex. And one day she says, let's have sex, and she grabs him, and he's like, no, and he runs out the house, and his robes are still in her hands, and she's like, huh, I'm going to be a troll. And she says to the servant, she says, he just raped me, he just came into my room and raped me. And when I screamed, sorry, my lighting is just, when he screamed, and when I screamed, he ran out of the house, and here is his robe. And when the master came back, she told him the same story, that bitch. She was like, Joseph just raped me, he got me on the bed, and he raped me. And the master was like, oh, this prick. And so Joseph ends up in prison for a crime that he didn't fucking commit. So Joseph is in prison, and God of gods, God, the Lord, whatever, says, don't worry Joseph, I'm still here for you, I'm going to bless you with the power to fucking whatever. So then Joseph is in prison with two inmates. There's a baker, I think it's a baker, a cook or something, and there's a wine cellar. And one day they're crying, and he says, why? And they're like, we can't interpret our dreams, we've just had dreams and we can't interpret them. And Joseph's like, I'll interpret it for you, I'm a dream interpreter. And they're like, really, will you? And he's like, yeah. So the wine seller says, well, I dreamt that there was a grape vine in front of me with 3 vines and grapes growing on them, and I got the grapes and I squeezed them into a cup and I gave it to the king, and the king was pleased. And Joseph says, ah, well, what it means is in 3 days you'll be let out of prison, the king will pardon you, and you'll give him some wine as gratitude. And then the baker says to him, I had a dream too. I had 3 baskets full of pastry, and I was walking down the street, and there were some birds eating the pastry out of my basket. And Joseph said, well, that's a brilliant dream. You see, what that was, you're also going to be let out of prison, but the king's going to fucking chop off your head, and he's going to hang you from a pole, and birds are going to eat your fucking rotten flesh. No kidding. Genesis 40:16. Read it for yourself. So then the baker obviously starts crying because he knows he's going to die horribly. And Joseph is like, well, it's what the Lord has intended, it's God's plan. Sorry about that. It's actually 40:18. So yeah, just search it online, 40:18 to 19. Terrible, like, it's fucking horrible. Can't believe, when I was reading this I was like, what? Really? So yeah. Joseph's brothers return to Jacob. I've got to hurry up now because I haven't got much space on my camera left, but still. Joseph's brothers return to Jacob and they say, oh God, you'd never guess what happened while we were out. Joseph got attacked by a wild animal. Here's his robe and he died. And his father was like, oh, woe is me. So whatever. And then the baker was killed. He was hung by a pole and the birds ate his flesh, just as Joseph told him it would happen. But the other guy, for some reason, he got let out, and yeah. The wine seller, told the king, ah, that Joseph fellow, he's brilliant at interpreting dreams. Why don't you go and see him, because I know that you've been having dreams and you don't really know anything about them. And the king was like, ah, okay. So he says, fetch me that prisoner, Joseph. And Joseph comes and he's like, yes, master. And the king is like, ah, tell me what my fucking dream means. and he tells him this really weird dreams about, like, this really weird dream about a cow, or 7 cows, and there's little skinny cows, and they're eating the fat cows, and it's just like a really weird dream. And then Joseph says, well, that will mean that there'll be 7 years of lovely Egypt, you know, Egypt will be brilliant, but then there's going to be 7 years of famine and everyone's going to die. And the king was like, oh, brilliant, haha, you're going to be made governor of Egypt. So he makes Joseph basically the same level as him. He's given, you know, all the powers that a king has. So basically, Joseph becomes king of Egypt. And so when the famine eventually comes, Jacob and his sons say, oh no, we've got nothing to eat. Why don't you guys go down to Egypt and buy some corn? So they go down to Egypt to buy some corn. And Joseph recognises them. He thinks, these bitches left me to die. So he has fun with them. He's like, you guys are spies, aren't you? And they're like, no, we're honest men. And Joseph is like, no, you're spies. And they're like, no, we're honest men. And Joseph's like, no, you're spies. And the men are like, no, please, man, we're just here to buy some corn. And Joseph's like, no, I'm going to lock you in jail. You're going to prison. You're bad men. So he locks them in prison. So then he lets them out of prison because he's had enough, and he gives them all the corn they want, and they go back to Jacob's place. But there's like a twist. He puts all the money that they paid for the corn back in their sacks. And when they stop on like halfway back to Jacob's house, they look in their sacks and they find the money in there, and they're like, oh no, maybe we forgot to pay for the corn, and they feel really bad. So then, about a year later, they return back to Egypt and give the money back, and then Joseph, being the troll that he is, plants a silver cup in the youngest brother's sack, and he sends a messenger forward and says, someone's stolen the king's special cup. Whoever has it is going to be hanged and eaten. And they're like, oh, search all of our sacks then. And they find it in the youngest brother's sack, and they're like, okay, you'll come back to Egypt. And then they all go back to Egypt because they're so awesome. And Joseph is like, mask is off now, guys. I'm Joseph, your long-lost brother. And they all start crying and hugging and kissing, and then they all go back to Jacob's house, and they're like, Joseph is still alive, and Jacob's like, oh, really? And they all go to Egypt, and Joseph lets them into Egypt, and they all live happily ever after. Well, Jacob then dies, and they all have a funeral, whatever, and then Joseph dies, and that's the end of Genesis. I missed some bits out of that because they just were too bad. One bit about a guy who was having sex with a woman and he didn't want her to get pregnant, so he made the semen spill on the floor, and God killed him. He killed him for that. I missed that bit out because I couldn't really squeeze it in. Just some guy, Lord thought that his conduct was bad, so he killed him. It couldn't have been any worse than, you know, some of the things that were happening, like the king who raped Dinah just because he thought she was pretty and he fell in love with her. But anyway, that's the end of Genesis, and I hope you enjoyed this. It's going to become a very regular thing. I'm going to read every book, except for next week. I'm going to London, so I won't be able to read what's the next one? Exodus? Yeah, Exodus. I won't be able to read the next one next week, but there's no reason why I won't be able to read it the week after next week. So, thank you. Subscribe if you want. I'm not forcing you, like, you know, SXE Phil probably would. But, yeah. If you liked it, then whatever. I don't know how long this video is going to be, but it might be quite long. Goodbye. I've got to hurry up now because I haven't got much